Ever imagine, like, just casually hanging out underwater, swimming with fish, maybe exploring a shipwreck or two, and breathing like it's no big deal?
That's the allure of scuba diving,
Right.
right? And the real hero making that possible, the thing that lets us breathe down there, is the SCUBA cylinder.
So today we're going deep, literally, into the world of these cylinders. We'll break down what they're made of, how they manage to pack all that air, and why understanding them is so crucial for a safe and, let's be honest, awesome dive.
You know what's really cool about these
How's
cylinders?
that?
They're way more than just some metal tanks. We're talking meticulously engineered pressure vessels built with safety and efficiency in mind.
Pressure vessels, huh? Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. What are these cylinders actually made of that makes them so tough?
Well, you'll usually find them made from either steel or aluminum.
Okay.
And here's the kicker. They're often zinc-plated on the outside and have this special coating inside.
Oh,
Yeah, because trust me, nobody wants a lungful of rust with their air underwater. That coating is vital for preventing corrosion. You've got the seawater on the outside, pressurized air inside. It's a recipe for Rust City without it.
makes sense. So it's not just about keeping the water out, but also about making sure the air we're breathing stays clean. Now, I've definitely seen cylinders come in different sizes. What's the deal with that?
You're sharp to pick up on that? Those different sizes directly relate to how much air they hold.
Okay,
The most common ones you'll see out there hold something like 10, 12, maybe 15 liters of air.
got it.
And this is where it gets interesting, especially for longer dives. You have experienced divers opting for a twin set.
Twin set, that sounds serious. What is that, like having a spare tire, but for air?
You nailed it. Basically, it's two cylinders all hooked up together, which means double the air supply for those extended underwater adventures.
Double the air, double the fun, right. But now I've got asked the million-dollar question. How do they even get all that air crammed into those cylinders in the first place?
It's not like you're inflating a balloon down there.
That's where the magic of pressure comes in.
Okay.
And no, I'm not talking about the pressure of performing a perfect dive. We measure this in bar R, which stands for atmospheres of pressure.
All right, break that down for me. What's bar R all about in the diving world?
Picture it this way. At the surface, we're chilling at 1 bar R of pressure. But for every 10 meters you go down in the water, you add another bar R on top of that.
Oh,
So 10 meters deep, you're at 2 BAR. 20 meters, 3 BAR. You get the idea. The deeper you dive, the more everything gets squeezed, including that air we need to breathe.
so it's like squeezing a sponge. The deeper you go, the more compressed everything gets. So how does this squeezing this pressure help us get all that air into the cylinder to begin with?
SQBA cylinders, they're filled to a working pressure of, get this, 200 to 300 BAR. That's insane. Hundreds of times the pressure of the air we breathe normally.
Wow.
And it's this crazy pressure that lets us pack a ton of air into a relatively small space.
That's wild. I never really thought about how much pressure goes into filling these things. It's like squeezing all the air from like a whole room into a container the size of a fire extinguisher.
That's a great way to put it. And because of all that pressure, even your standard 12-liter cylinder can give a diver a surprising amount of breathable air.
That's amazing. Okay, so we've got these super strong cylinders filled with this highly pressurized air. But how do we actually figure out how much breathable air we get from that? Like,
Oh,
there's got to be a way to calculate that, right?
You're right, right. That's the question, isn't it? I mean, we've all seen those movies, the divers down there running out of air at the worst possible time.
Right.
How do they even know how much is left in the first place?
Well, yeah, those movie scenes are always good for some drama, but real talk, responsible diving, it's all
Yeah.
about keeping an eye on your air constantly.
Yeah.
We've got this thing called a submersible pressure gauge, or SPG for short.
Tells us exactly how much air is left in the cylinder at any given time. But going back to your question about calculating how much air we actually get to breathe, that's where it gets kind of cool.
Yeah, so hit me with the physics here.
Remember we were talking about the pressure increasing with depth?
Right, right.
Well, that pressure, it affects the air we breathe too.
Yeah.
So as we go deeper, the surrounding pressure goes up, which means every breath we take ends up using more air from our cylinders.
So it's not as easy as saying, okay, I've got a 12-liter cylinder, I can stay down for this many minutes, you know?
Exactly, yeah. There's no one-size-fits-all answer here. Air consumption, it changes depending on, well, you. How deep you go, how fast you're breathing, even stuff like the water temperature, or if you're fighting against a current.
So many variables at play.
Yeah.
Is there any way for divers to, like, even estimate how long their air will last? Or is it kind of a go-by-feel situation?
Well, there are some, rules of thumb. Divers use them to get a general idea. For example, a common estimate is that a diver at the surface, breathing normally, will go through about 20 liters of air every minute.
Okay.
But then you have to think about all those other things, especially depth.
Right, because the deeper you go, the faster you're burning through the air.
Exactly. Pressure, remember? Let's say you're at 10 meters. That's 2 bar of pressure. You're breathing twice as fast as you would be up at the surface.
Oh, wow.
So that 20 liters per minute doubles to 40.
Okay, so being aware of your depth, air consumption, super important. But even with those, rules of thumb we were talking about, it seems like there's still a lot of room for things to go wrong.
And that's exactly why, as divers, we're always cautious, you know? Always check our SPGs, plan our dives conservatively, never, ever push those air limits.
Right, makes sense. Safety first when you're underwater and need to breathe.
Hmm.
Speaking of safety, these cylinders themselves, all that pressurized air inside, they have to go through some serious testing, right?
You're on the right track. These cylinders, they're built tough, but it's super important to make sure they can handle all that pressure they're under.
Right.
That's why they go through rigorous testing. We're talking like hydrostatic testing.
Hydrostatic testing. Sounds intense. What even is that?
Basically, it's like a super-powered pressure test. They fill the cylinder up completely with water,
Okay.
which, unlike air, water can't be compressed.
And that's important for the test.
Absolutely. Since water can't be compressed, you can crank up the pressure inside the cylinder way beyond its normal limit, safely.
Oh, wow.
Helps to find any weak spots, any little cracks in the metal.
So it's like giving the cylinder the ultimate stress test. Just to be extra sure, it can take more pressure than it would on a normal dive.
Exactly. It's all about making sure that cylinder is solid, safe to use. Think of it like an X-ray for your cylinder, you know?
Yeah.
Shows any hidden flaws that could be, well, dangerous. And get this, after every single successful test, they stamp the cylinder with the date, like a seal of approval.
So if I'm renting gear, I should always look for that stamp on the cylinder, huh?
Always.
Yeah.
A good dive shop would never even think about filling or renting out a cylinder that's overdue for a test. But, you know, it never hurts to check, right? Look over your gear, the stamp, before every dive.
Good advice. It's reassuring to know these things go through such rigorous testing.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the testing. What about everyday care for these cylinders?
Oh.
What can divers do to make sure their air supply is safe and their cylinders are in good shape for the long run? So we're treating these cylinders with respect, but are there, specific things, do's and don'ts, when it comes to taking care of them?
You bet. Think of it this way. You wouldn't just chuck your phone around, would you?
No way, especially not with what those things cost.
Exactly. And SQB cylinders deserve that same respect, if not more, right? We're talking about highly pressurized air here.
Right. So rule number 1, no using the cylinder to, break down a door at the dive shop, huh?
Good rule of thumb. But
Yeah.
seriously, any dings, any damage, especially around the valves, that can be bad news.
Right.
Could mess with how the cylinder works, and we don't want that.
Definitely not. So handle with care. What else?
Temperature. That's a big one.
Okay.
Remember how we talked about pressure increasing with depth?
Yeah.
Same deal with heat. Leave a cylinder out in the sun too long, that internal pressure can go through the roof.
So not using our SUBA cylinder as a barbecue while we're waiting for the dive boat?
Probably not the best idea. It's all about storing your cylinders in a cool, dry place when you're not using them. And speaking of storage, let's talk about after the dive.
Okay, so what should divers do to keep those cylinders happy after a dive?
Give it a good rinse with fresh water. Salt water, it's corrosive, so getting that residue off is key. And then, just like your other gear, make sure it's bone dry before you put it away.
Rinse and dry, got it. Sounds like a bit of care goes a long way.
Absolutely. It's all about understanding these cylinders, how they work, how to keep them in tip-top shape.
Right, knowledge is power. We went from, how these things hold all that air to why testing is so important, and even how something as simple as temperature can play a role.
It all ties together, right?
It does. It really highlights how important it is for divers to be in the know, to be responsible when they're using this equipment.
For sure.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. We've covered air consumption, how crucial it is to monitor that air supply throughout your dive. But how exactly DO divers do that? What kind of gadgets, what kind of gauges help them keep tabs on their air underwater? Now, that's a story for another deep dive.